Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Time to preview the Canadian division. I think this is the most exciting division of all of them in the realignment. Quite easily, this is the one everyone's got to be looking forward to the most, I think, at least. This is the one I'm looking forward to the most. It's the most exciting one, the one with the most rivalries, perhaps, the one with maybe the most bad blood of all of them. Also a very good book, by the way, if you haven't read it. But I'm so excited because I think there'll also be a lot of offense. I think there'll be just a lot of fights. And quite frankly, I feel like it's a very tight division. I feel like anything not called the Ottawa Senators kind of has a chance.
Yep.
And then there's the Ottawa Senators who, are a hockey team.
I've seen a lot of people suggesting that the Senators have some sort of shot this season.
No.
Yeah. You would have to be leaning on a lot of unprecedented rookie performances for that to happen, in my opinion.
I would love to see where people think it's coming from because I don't really see it.
I think just Stetzel being a beast, but
yeah, him, and then of course you have Brady, and it's one of those things where
Patterson. I mean, they've got interesting prospects. It's not this isn't their year.
Unfortunately, the real life is not like NHL, the video game, where you get a bunch of rookies, you put them on good lines, and then the next year you're winning the Stanley Cup somehow. Like, it just doesn't work like that. It's a lot harder in real life. And so I just don't see this. I'm excited to see what happens. I think, if anything, if I'm the Ottawa Senators, I'm so stoked that they get, a year to essentially develop these kids in what's a shorter time frame and really see what's going on. Why not throw caution to the wind and really try things and see what happens? I think if anything for them, it's really good. They have such a good prospect pool, and some of these guys that are coming up already playing at the NHL is only good for them. So I do think their future is looking up. I just don't see a way in hell they're really competitive this year. I do see it, but I don't believe it.
I don't. I just too much needs to go right.
Yeah, too much needs to go right to really consider.
Too much needs to go. I don't. You look at this the rest of these teams, and it's not like any of these teams, with the exception of the Maple Leafs, were like top teams last season or anything, but all of them have some sort of pedigree, and all of them you could see, or you could at least make an argument for them to make the playoffs in a normal season.
Perhaps,
except for Ottawa, where they're so far off last season, and even coming into this season, it would have to be like a meteoric change in performance from a lot of players. They're like, yes, Brady's great, but is he like a 40 goal scorer? I don't think so.
Also, is Brady a play driver?
Right.
Don't
is he?
think we've
is
seen
anybody?
that yet. Like, who's his center too? Chris Tierney?
Hopefully he can do that against the best defense. Well, okay. Again, we are talking about a Canadian division where what is the best defense, or what even is defense in general?
Yeah.
But yeah. So there's that's the fun thing about this division. You can make the argument that none of these teams are particularly good defensively. I hear a lot of praise for the Flames defense, but
I've heard praise for the Canadiens.
It's not like Riddick was the best goalie in the world or anything, but
yeah,
they weren't super good last season either, allowing like the 11th most goals against. Markstrom may help that a bit, but I still think we're going to see some fireworks, and by some I mean almost constant fireworks.
Yeah.
For those of you in the betting crowd, I think betting the overs in every game for like the first 2 weeks is going to just be fun.
Oh, I agree. That's what I was planning on doing too. I'm planning on just kind of taking overs in a lot of games, except the Dallas games and the Arizona games.
Oh, I just mean straight, only the Canadian division.
Oh,
overs Canadian division is just feels very easy to me, unless they're like already set at like 7 goals or something.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start off our first division preview. Of course, we're starting with the Canadian division, which means we start in Calgary. Oh, and for those that don't know how this works, so the way that the division previews work is we go through every team, we talk through the fantasy relevant players, and we just kind of give a few notes on them, what we think of their season, and just kind of help you have a little bit of a guide. This is not our projections. This is not that kind of thing. This is more like, let's talk it out and see how we're feeling about players. Essentially what I'd sort of do if I were prepping for a draft, or if even I was in the middle of a draft, what would I look at to see if this makes sense, right? So let's start off with Calgary. And I think the first place to start is someone we've talked about already on the Sleepers episode, and that's their number one center, Sean Monahan, who currently has an ADP of 149.8.
Yep. Well, I think that, I've heard some rumors that Lindholm will be moved to center. this season, but I don't understand why the Flames would do that. You look at their roster composition, you say, okay, Lindholm goes to center, Monahan becomes 3C, Sam Bennett moves to the wing, Dubé winds up right wing. I don't know. Like I don't quite understand where the rationale between, unless they move Monahan to the wing, which I don't think he's ever played.
I don't
guess
think
it's
that'll
plausible.
happen.
But it doesn't really add up to me why they would do that. So I'm under the impression that he's being underrated right now. He was on my sleeper list.
Mine too.
If he does wind up being 3C, then he's in trouble.
Yeah.
But
Obviously.
I don't really see why they would do that.
Yeah, I don't see it either because the minutes last year didn't really fall off to justify that. I don't think you'd take a guy like Monahan and immediately place him on your third line, right? Like I just don't see that happening.
Yeah.
I could maybe see a second line where he commands that line, perhaps, or what's effectively a 1A, 1B line. I could maybe see that happen, but
They're not going to move Backlund.
No,
There's no
you know
way.
the Flames are a funny story in which 2 years ago they were extremely lucky. I mean, just insane
Yep.
on ice shooting percentages. Everything was going in for them. Everything was working, and that's when Sean Monahan got 82 points in 78 games and was on pace for 86. Then last year, everything went wrong. Everything dropped off, and somehow they got unlucky, which normally doesn't happen. But that being said, his power play percentage didn't change, and his time on ice relatively stayed the same. So I expect him to be kind of in that 60 is his floor sort of thing from a pace perspective, or not 60,
Against
60
the full
points in like
season.
82.
Yeah.
I don't know what the pace would be now, but 60, and then I think kind of
Yeah, that'd be like 45 or something. A
yeah,
little
something
less.
like that. This is going to be tough because I did not convert these to 56
45
game
is,
seasons.
yeah, it'd be like
But,
43 or something. I don't know.
Yeah. But I think he's good for, I think his best and his ceiling is probably somewhere in between last year and the year prior. I think somewhere in the middle is what I expect from Monahan. It's not as bad as last year, but not as good as the year before.
I think that defines the entire team.
Yes.
With the exception of Matthew Tkachuk, who is immune, apparently.
Yeah.
But Johnny Gaudreau is a player that I'm looking at, especially in points leagues. I feel like in Cats leagues, especially banger leagues, he was always a little bit overvalued, even in his good seasons, just because like he doesn't really give you a whole lot. And this is just typical of any points forward player like a Rantanen or a Marner. You get things from them, but you don't get full stat coverage, and you can wind up putting yourself in a hole. So this season with Gaudreau going a little bit further down, he had a career low shooting percentage last season at 8.6. He is going to be the same story that you just mentioned with Monahan, where we're going to see him be somewhere in between what happened last season and the prior season. I expect him to kind of float near point per game pace, probably maybe a little lower. So in a 56 game season, let's say he gets 53-ish. I think that beyond that, like his stats should be relatively in line with the previous season.
Yeah.
Still
I
decent
agree.
shots, still not much else.
Yeah, that shooting percentage comes up a little bit. But other than that, you kind of see, like you said, point per game and a little bit less. And I think he's great in points leagues. I would not underrate him there, especially in point-only leagues where you're counting goals and assists. I think he could be a little bit of a steal there. Although I would assume as well at the same time, though, he's not that much of a sleeper because everyone associates Gaudreau already with this point getter. So, but some people might be scared off of him, which is why he might be a little bit of a sleeper there. And then there's Matthew Tkachuk, who you said, is immune to it, and he's going to 37.4. And to me, my favorite option on the Flames. I don't think it's difficult to say that. He's easily the best option on the Flames, and the ADP kind of justifies that. And quite frankly, I think he's kind of going right around what his ADP should for for a standard league. I think it's right around what you'd expect. 72 points last year in 69 games. I don't know if I expect that. Exactly.
I expect similar to what I predicted for Gaudreau for him.
Yeah.
Like point per game, slightly below maybe.
Slightly below point per game. And the difference is just
more
that
goals.
obviously he gives you a lot more stat coverage. That's pretty much the big thing. But, aside from that, like his season last year was actually very similar to the year before that. The big difference, though, was that his shooting percentage came down, which is actually a good thing for him. So I think around point per game is kind of sustainable for him, which is kind of nuts. But I do love Matthew Tkachuk. And then there's the guy you kind of already mentioned a little bit, which is Elias Lindholm going at 81 ADP. I don't think there's that much exciting about him at that point. I don't think he's a really good points option to me. That's kind of
Yep.
what I see Lindholm as. Is a good points option. His hits are fine, just not
exist.
great. They exist. The thing is, though, depending on how you've drafted, if you are in a hits league, like by that point where Lindholm is going, you might be wanting to look at more kind of broad options because you might be lacking in hits. If you've already gone
Right.
really hit heavy, then maybe an Elias Lindholm makes sense. But he's a point guy first and foremost. So if you're drafting him, you just got to consider, okay, he comes with points, and that's about it.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a couple other. I feel like we're going to get asked about a few other likely roster additions this season. Juuso Välimäki, and a not so new addition in Rasmus Andersson,
Yeah.
and what'll happen with guys like Mangiapane. In my opinion, none of those guys I just mentioned are probably fantasy relevant this season. I wouldn't even take a late round stab on any of them. The only one that I might be looking at is actually Rasmus Andersson. If he's able to, for some reason, take top power play from Mark Giordano. I assume if Giordano gets hurt or whatever, Anderson's probably next in line.
Yeah.
Could also be Handovan, could be Välimäki, but I think Anderson's probably next in line. But the problem is he doesn't give you anything else. He's well below replacement value. If he doesn't have that top power play, it's not worth holding on to him for it. Mangiapane is in a similar situation where he's sitting on power play too, so even if he has a good season, it's probably not going to be good enough to warrant holding on to him. And then moving to goalies.
And then Giordano real quick. Let's just brush up
yeah.
Giordano real quick at 108.8. This is Yahoo ADP, of course. He's still, to me, a good option in blocks leagues first and foremost.
He's a great option in blocks leagues.
Incredible.
He'll give you elite
option.
blocks.
I'd say he's almost a sleeper in blocks leagues. Not exactly, because he doesn't give you much else. And I think there is a really good chance that he loses that top power play spot.
He might.
But I don't know.
I still think he's good for slightly above half a point per game, decent power play points, and good, great blocks actually, and relatively decent shots. So I think 108 in regular leagues is pretty good. In blocks leagues, you could probably bump him up a bit. He could probably be a really late first defenseman on a team, depending on what your caps are.
I don't know about that. I mean, when you've got Darlene and people go, I don't know. To me, Giordano is not a first
But you have to pick
defenseman. He's
12
a really good
defensemen ahead of
second.
him. I feel like he's about 12th, especially in a blocks league.
Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah.
I don't love him. I like him.
I don't love him either, but
I think in a blocks
it's
league
not
is the
super
only...
easy to find a defenseman that has value beyond blocks that is also a very good blocker.
Yeah, his
Those
shot
are
pace
tough to
also
come
is
by.
not that bad, to be honest. He does.
Yeah, it isn't. It's okay.
Nice. He does have a good ceiling. That's the thing I do like about him, is that if that Flames team clicks, there is a really good ceiling for him, especially on that power play.
Moving to goalies now. They've acquired Jacob Markstrom, which is
Great move, in my
hopefully an upgrade to David Riddick. The first question I have is he truly the starter, or is he going to be a 1A in a 1A 1B situation?
I don't think Jacob Markstrom went somewhere to be in a 1A 1B situation. That is my take, based on what he said or what we've got, at least, right, from the media. The talks were Jacob Markstrom wants to be a starter. I don't think he left Calgary to go get into a goalie battle somewhere. I think
Vancouver, you mean?
Vancouver. Sorry. I think he went to Calgary to be a starter. And my guess is going to be that it's his net unless he loses it. So can he lose it? Yes, of course. That being said, I think it's his to lose. And I think the biggest issue with Riddick for Calgary, and that tandem in general, to be honest, was just the inconsistency. It's so inconsistent. And so I think that that's what they're hoping to get out of Markstrom, which is what he gave the Canucks, with so much consistency throughout the season. So he's proven he can do it. The question is, will he? And I don't know. And new teams are tough for goaltenders. A lot of times they struggle on new teams. takes him a little bit to understand the system and understand where to kick out rebounds, where the defenseman will be, and things like that. So I don't know. At 76.9, I like him, and I like the Calgary Flames team. I like him a lot less because of the Canadian division as a whole. If this were a regular season, I'd like him a hell of a lot more. But because he's stuck in that Canadian division, I think he falls for me in terms of ranking.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Well,
shall we move on to the Oilers then?
Let's move on to the Oilers. Maybe one of the most stacked teams when it comes to fantasy. Aside from maybe the Maple Leafs and hell, even Vancouver.
Oh, the Leafs,
There's a lot in this division. So Edmonton is pretty straightforward. Look, we can knock out two of them immediately, McDavid and Draisaitl. We know what they are.
I literally didn't even put them on my list.
They don't say?
You're going to draft them somewhere between first and fourth.
Yep.
Most likely. First and third now with Kucherov out.
They're going to be good. I mean, the only call out, of course, I'll make as always, is with McDavid. He is a very, very point-heavy person. It does put you in a little bit of a pickle. So I always advise people who draft McDavid to pay attention to who's around in that second round, because you can do pretty well with a Marchand or a Wheeler or I'm blanking, Stamkos, those kinds of guys who are going to give you peripherals on your team while also giving you points, right? So just be sure to be cognizant of that if you're in a bangers league about that. Otherwise, look, Draisaitl and McDavid speak for themselves. Now, the next guy here that I had with a high ADP is going to be RNH, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, who I actually think is being slept on a bit at 72.8.
I like him a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really have much to say about him. I think last season was indicative of what we could probably see this season. I think he's going to be a strong player. Power play one lock. He's finally not being... He's not really much of a worry of him playing center in some weird line.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, I don't even know if it is a worst case scenario. He's either going to be playing with McDavid or Draisaitl. Neither one is a bad scenario. So I think that he's in a really good spot for this season.
Especially for points leagues.
Yeah. Well, even not in points leagues. He gets some hits and stuff. So he's a good player.
A few. I mean, last year he was on pace for 42 hits. That's not enough. It's one every other game. That's
I thought
nothing.
I had more than that.
Yeah, no, he does nothing. But he does shoot quite a bit. His shooting percentage is line, 80% of teams' power play percentage last year. Like, I think he's point per game. That's where I see RNH, and I don't think he's getting drafted as a point per game guy. I think he's getting drafted as or the expectation is a little bit less. So I do see him as a little bit of a sleeper. The only two other guys I had here to talk about from that starting forward roster that I think at least are kind of fantasy relevant was Yamamoto and Cassian. I see a lot of people throwing around the sleeper tag on Yamamoto. I personally don't really see it.
I literally put proceed with caution on my script.
Especially at 119.
There's a good chance he doesn't get power play one.
Yeah.
And that is a big deal. A really big deal on this team. Considering how many of their points come from the power play, especially last season.
And on top of that, like if you consider the 119 spot of ADP, like there's a lot of guys going around there that I like way more than Yamamoto that we mentioned in the sleepers episode. And with much less risk, I think. And like you said, so many of the points for Edmonton come on that power play. And so, dropped my case. If Yamamoto doesn't get on the top power play, you're going to be seeing some trouble. And then there's Zach Cassian, solely a hits option. Probably top line though, so he could get some points too. Someone who maybe
a very him in when you need him, but
either stream him in when you need him, or if you're in a deep league, it's someone to pay attention to as a late flyer. That'll be really, really good because he's going to get that 5-on-5 exposure to at least McDavid because he plays on that top right wing. So just someone to pay attention to.
There is one more player. Actually, I have a forward on my list, Jesse Puljujarvi. The funny thing is, one of our first bad reviews was about me butchering Puljujarvi's name, which I probably still am doing.
You probably are still
5 years ago.
His name.
So it's kind of funny that it's 2021 and we're almost
and here we are again,
and we're talking about the same player that we still don't really know who he is from an NHL perspective.
Wow, you're really ready to call this 2021, huh? What happened in 2020?
I don't know. I don't remember. I blacked it all out.
We've blacked it all out at this point.
But so he could wind up playing on a top 6 role. Had a pretty strong season over in Finland, and Yeah, he's somebody to pay
But
attention to, especially if he winds up playing top right wing. I don't know if I would draft him. I might take
yeah, I'm
depending on what my league looks like. I might grab him in the last round and just literally to see if he winds up playing the first game on McDavid or Draisaitl's wing and on top power play, and then be ready to drop him within like a week or two.
yeah.
Don't get too excited. Is
Yeah.
basically what I'm saying there.
And then we move on to the defense, and the first one, and maybe the most relevant one here, aside from Nurse, is Tyson Barrie. 84.7. He's a power play one lock for now, in my opinion. That being said, like, I know I've said, Evan Bouchard is in the waiting. I think if someone were to come up, I think it's probably between Bouchard and Nurse for who gets that top power play if Barrie doesn't click. But Barrie is a power play specialist. Full stop. And when he did this in Colorado and he had a good team around him, he crushed. So I expect him to do the same in Edmonton, honestly. And I'd argue the ceiling with Barrie is very, very high. That would be my assumption. Now, there is a problem with this, though. Now, when I was looking, I think Dom did his season preview. I think he actually had Barrie on the third pairing, but he had him on the top power play. So if that happens, it hurts him a lot because you're seeing essentially Keith Yandel, where all you're seeing is power play time, but you're getting no 5-on-5 time, which means you're capped very, very heavily at what you can do. So I'm not 100% sure what to think of with Barrie, just because of what that I'm not worried about his power play time. I'm worried about his 5-on-5 time. That's more what I'm
He's
worried
a high
about.
floor, a high ceiling, low floor player, I think.
Yes, that's exactly.
And there's one thing to think about, like, are we convinced that Clefbaum is not good on the power play? Because we saw a few different players.
Clefbaum is done.
He's
not
I
playing
know.
the season.
I'm not saying him playing the season. I'm
Okay,
talking about the
fair.
team in general. So Clefbaum was a shooter. He's a shooting defenseman, and yet he never really did a whole lot on the.
That's fair.
Either at even strength or on the power play. So does that mean that just because of the strength of the forwards that Edmonton has, the quarterback really doesn't matter as much? And I think that's actually a plausible scenario. If that happens, then that might mean the play doesn't drive through Barrie as much as he'd like and as much as his owners may like. So it's something I don't want to really dig too deep on that because it's super speculative, and I'm not going to like knock a player because maybe they just won't pass to him.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
it's something. It's not nothing that Clefbaum never really broke out the way that it sure seemed like he should have.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Clefbaum from last year, he was on a 45-point pace, and he played 78% of the team's power play time. That's a lot of time on the power play, and he shot a lot. He had 33
On the
shots
best power
on the power
play in the league, by the way.
Yeah, so he did really well last season, and he was at a 45-point pace. And that was playing 25 minutes a game. I don't think they're playing Tyson Barrie 25 minutes a game.
No way.
And so if that's the case, like you're saying, right? Like, let's say that's true, where just the system and the power play that's in place in Edmonton doesn't go through the defense as much and it doesn't matter, then Tyson Barrie could be a pretty bad pick at that 84. So he's both, it's weird because he's both a potential sleeper and a potential bust at the same time. Because, like you said, he's just such a high floor, or low floor, sorry, and a high ceiling. The only other guys to talk about, and then there's Darnell Nurse. Amazing banger option, obviously. I think he's a sleeper at 143.
So I looked this up earlier. Last season, he was top 10 for defensemen. He was top 10 in shots, top 10 in hits, and top 10 in blocks.
Yeah.
Actually, he was 11th in shots, but like, come on. Plus, he gives you PIM value if you're in a PIM league. He is a monster, like a true multi-cat monster.
I'd honestly argue that 143.8 ADP is a steal. He's a sleeper in Bangers leagues.
Definitely.
In Bangers league, he's a sleeper.
I told somebody that was in a PIMS blocks, shots, and hits league in our Discord for Patreon. He asked about his sleepers, or rather his keepers, and I told him to replace Krug with Nurse. I was like, it makes a lot of sense for your team comp. And I like, it was a keep 4. So this is like a pretty early, I think it was like 14 or 16 teams though. So, but regardless, like in a league like that, he covers so many categories that it gives you a fighting chance against any team.
Yeah.
You don't really need to worry about walking in against a team that has a lot of points because you can back yourself up with shots, hits, and blocks from Nurse, or if they're peripheral heavy, then your other point getters can back you up on the other side of it. So he's a really good versatile player.
It is really hard to play against multi-cap monsters because you need to attack or defend from multiple areas when you're playing against that team. That's why multi-cap monsters are so valuable. And then speaking of a blocks guy, there's Adam Larson to mention if you're in a blocks league that's really deep. Always a good
hits. He gets good hits too.
Get some hits too. Yeah,
no
good,
shots though, really.
Really good streamer as well. Someone to pay attention to. And then there's Evan Bouchard to put on your watch list in case he comes up. Chance a top power play. I wouldn't expect it this year. I don't think this is his year yet, but I do like it. And the last one here is Mikko Koskinen. If you count wins in your league, if you count wins in your league, and that's your like primary source of points or category or whatever for goaltenders, even saves, Mikko Koskinen 176.6 is mighty interesting.
He really is. I think he's being. I mean, we're not talking about like he's not the best goalie in the league, right?
No.
Honestly, he's an average goalie, maybe a little bit even worse, but he's on a team that's so offensively powerful that getting wins seems pretty likely for him. I also don't think that they're going to start Mike Smith a whole lot. I think he will be firmly a backup to Koskinen here, and it's going to be tricky to find wins that late. Real tricky. His upside's pretty high, and the risk is, depending on your league. If it's a win save percentage goal against average league, then man, it's hard to recommend just about any Canadian goalie.
But the risk
goalie
with
on the Canadian
too is
team rather. But
there's no risk. I mean, you're either taking him last round given what's happening, or you're picking him up off waivers at this point because he's just not getting drafted or just going so late. I love Mikko Koskinen, especially in deeper leagues. I think he's someone 100% to pay attention to, especially if he's paired with, say, you got good goalies. Like, for example, in my keeper league, I already have Vasilevsky. I would absolutely kind of think about Mikko Koskinen and eye that and think, I'm going to run 3 goalies this season. If I can get one more good goalie in my draft and then pick up or grab Mikko Koskinen, my goaltenders could be looking pretty good, especially in the wins and saves categories. Something to think about. Okay, moving on to the Montreal Canadiens. A lot of depth pieces. Just a lot of...
That's exactly what I have written here.
Really? That's exactly what I thought.
A deep team,
it's deep,
but no real standouts for fantasy, largely because of the split power play.
Yeah. It's weird. I
feel like Montreal...
talk about some of them.
When you look on paper, they should be one of the better teams in the league, and I still don't... I don't know. I am worried about Carey Price. If I'm totally honest. I think a shortened season's probably good news for him.
The acquisition of Jake Allen is good for him.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't trust Jake Allen either, but he has always been better as a backup.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what he's going to be. And I think Carey Price needs rest, first and foremost. They cannot be playing him like they've been playing him the last few years. He just cannot, especially with his injury history, right? I mean, it makes sense to start with the goaltenders in Montreal. I mean, that's, Carey Price is the superstar there. And going to 53.1. I still like Carey Price for what it's worth. I still think he could have an amazing season. I think where I pause a little bit with Carey Price is how much is he going to play? Because
I don't know, man. I don't like any goalie in that division, really. Anderson is the only one I would consider early. 53 is too high for Price. I'm not touching Price until ever, probably. I
he
assume
has
somebody else is
burned
gonna
us
draft him
many a times. And I like him. I don't.
Hellebuck is the goalie to pick from that division. Even he he's
scary.
like, think about the teams he's gonna be playing every day. It's not going to be easy for him. It's just, you're going to get volume from him.
So it's going through the skaters here. I mean, I think that's enough on Carey Price. I think that's too high for him. If he falls to you, awesome. But I don't view him as a sleeper in any way I think I like other goalies behind him, honestly, just from a safety standpoint. So there's Brendan Gallagher, probably the only truly very fantasy relevant player on the Canadiens.
It's also exactly what I have written down.
Yeah, and he's good for bangers leagues.
The only player I get excited about on the entire Montreal Canadiens team for forwards anyway.
And he's only good in bangers leagues.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I keep holding my breath that he is going to literally break out and do more than just being like getting like 60 points with good peripherals. But
I just don't see it. I mean, he was on a 60-point pace last year. The year before that, he was on a 52-point pace. His shooting
he
percentage
does give you good shots though.
great shots,
and decent hits.
His power play percentage sucks. I mean, that split power play just sucks for everyone in fantasy.
Yeah. His ice time
makes it
also
brutal.
sucks.
Yeah, his ice time is kind of brutal. I mean, that's the other thing is they don't only do a split power play; they very much do like a split line thing.
Yep.
So it's just
He gets you nearly 4 shots a game though, which is
oh yeah, for shots he's amazing. And you know what? Like that gives you a pretty good floor when it comes. And honestly, another thing I didn't like was his hit pace actually fell off a cliff this last year.
Yep.
It went from 126 to 74. That's not good.
actually
So
I would assume that increases given that it's like constant division rivals.
maybe, but I don't know if maybe that was because of a change in play style or if it was a change
Could
in maybe
be,
like
but
a
considering the
role.
rest of his play didn't change that much, I would assume
know.
that he's still going to be smacking people this season.
I think his value is going right around where he should. I think that 88.6 is right for him. It makes a lot of sense. And then these other guys, honestly, they're all role players. They're all what do you believe in them? There's Tomas Tatar. I think as long as that split power play is happening, he's a waiver candidate, and I'm picking him up when he's hot. The same with the only other guy, Josh Anderson. Does he pick up his hitting? Again, a waiver guy to watch after the draft's over. Toffoli, a guy to watch. I know Brandon called him a sleeper, but like I wouldn't draft him. I just think
I think Tatar and Toffoli are basically the same player. Like as far as what you do with them, you can take them in the very late rounds and hope something happens. And even Nick Suzuki, I feel like those 3 players and Dano actually, all 4 of those guys, I treat almost identically. Like they all have some upside depending on what's happening and what kind of deployment they're getting. None of them are really going to do amazing. Although Tatar had a good season. I don't know. There's just unfortunately not a lot to like from a fantasy perspective on the Montreal forward core.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, they're a deep team. You know, when you look at Dom's, I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, so I'm not going to try. But
Lucian?
Is that how you say it? Really?
Yep.
Lucian. That's a lot easier than it looks. Anyways, he did the preview
I think he
for the
just
Montreal Canadiens.
changed it and Americanized it. So that
Makes sense. When you look at their team, like he has them set up kind of interestingly. So he has Tatar. So on the right wing, he has Tatar on the top left wing. Then he has Toffoli on the third right wing. So the right wings are Brendan Gallagher, Josh Anderson, Tyler Toffoli. So then that second line ends up being Jonathan Drouin, Nick Suzuki, Josh Anderson. Third line is Arturi Lehkonen, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and then Kotkaniemi, and then Tyler Toffoli. They're a deep team. I love those top 3 lines. I think they're all very good 3 lines. The thing is, that sucks for everyone.
Yep.
It sucks because if I am the Canadiens, I'm saying, you know what? Play them all a little bit equally. Why not? And so I don't like any of them. I'm not drafting them. Even Brendan Gallagher, honestly, I have pause on unless he like falls to me. I really hate that split power play. And then you get to the defense, and honestly, it's the same thing. You have Shea Weber going 92.7. Kind of a Shea. Really, he came back, and he just wasn't what you thought he'd be. It was really disappointing to me. His shot pace was fine at 233. His blocks pace and hits pace are really good. So his hits and blocks are really good. His points are really what suck. And a large part of that is because of the power play. That's the biggest reason that you see that. And then you have Jeff Petrie, who is honestly a very similar player, just with the way more hits and a few less shots. So if you had to, if you held me at gunpoint and asked me which player I'd prefer, I actually would prefer Petrie. Because he's going a few rounds, maybe a round or two later than Weber. And he's the same player, just less shots.
Yeah, I like Weber. I mean, the problem is he's at his draft position. It's like, is he better than Nurse? They're very similar. But Nurse's blocks and hits are much higher. And his PIM count is higher. So
it really depends, too, on the league. I think if it's a points league with shots, I would take Weber, obviously. If it's a categories league, I'd maybe take Petrie just because of value. He goes later. I think Petrie and Weber are the exact same players, just you sacrifice some shots for hits. Otherwise, they're the same player. Same percentage on the power play. Same power play time on ice. Same all that stuff. The only thing different is shots. Same point pace. Literally, they both were on a 46-point pace, and then the only difference is shots and points, and that's it. And then the honorable mention is the guy I mentioned on the sleepers, which is Ben Chirot, who was just kind of a peripheral monster. Got really good shots, had a really good hits pace and a really good box pace. So one of those deep options that just kind of does some good things for you in the peripheral department, but otherwise just someone to stream in occasionally. And that's the Montreal Canadiens, a very middle of the ground team that should make the playoffs. Good in real life, boring in fantasy, quite frankly.
Moving on to Ottawa now. Yeah. It sure seems like their first center is going to be Derek Stepan, probably.
I don't think so. Everything I've been reading is not Stepan. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a Senators fan can correct me here. I'm not hearing that it's going to be Stepan. For what it's worth, Dom has Colin White and then Chris Tierney.
Yeah, I mean, Colin White, Logan Brown. There's a few options. According
to Dom, like from a value perspective, Galchenyuk and Stepan are exactly the same. They're both equally bad.
Yeah.
So I don't know,
but nobody's looking at analytics in the NHL.
No, of course. No, I mean, I don't know. I just don't think Stepan. I'm not drafting. If that's what anyone's asking, I don't care.
No, I'm not either.
Care less about Stepan.
I just that wasn't a thing to be excited about. It was a thing that maybe to be depressed about. But
yeah, for sure. There's
there's a lot of youth on this team.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of it is draftable.
No.
Except guys that we already know. You know what I mean? Like Brady is young, of course, but clearly draftable. And Chabot. Yeah. And that's it for the youth that I would draft.
Yeah, for the youth, yes. That's maybe Stutzel, but I'd watch.
Stutzel, like, last round, maybe, if he even makes it. And then Dadonov isn't young at all, but he would be the only other forward I might consider. Connor Brown, maybe. Drake Batherson, maybe. But nobody that you're taking anything besides, like, this is my last round, and I want to throw it at somebody that might do something.
Yeah. I mean, Chabot and Brady are really the only two. I think Brady is going at the right value for... I think Brady is going at the right value for points leagues. I think he is severely underrated in categories leagues or standard leagues or anything that counts shit.
I heard his rank actually changed to like 30 something now.
Did it?
For standard Yahoo Cats. Yeah.
Weird.
His ADP is still down, but they've adjusted things.
I'll give this one away.
Makes more sense.
I'll give this one away that if I'm not saying this is where you should draft him, but if I plug in Yahoo standard cats and I ignore plus minus, that's what brings him down. It's the plus minus.
Yeah.
I ignore it. So I never think about it, but that's what brings him down. So if you ignore plus minus and you plug in Yahoo's or standard cats to a certain big name projector and see what he's ranked just about top 5. And he's, going 63. So there's a lot of value to be had in Brady Tkachuk. He is an Evander Kane type. But I will say, maybe people will not like this. I like Evander Kane over Brady Tkachuk.
Really?
Because of the upside in points. I don't think Brady has that points upside that Evander Kane does. I think they are a similar player when it comes to, shots more than anything. Evander Kane doesn't have the hits, obviously, or really the PIMs. I mean, their PIMs are not exactly the same.
He beat him in PIMs. Evander Kane had the most PIMs in the league last season.
Hits, Brady doubles him up. That's fine.
Yeah.
Where I like Evander Kane more is the point upside, especially in the power play point. Last year, Brady got 8. Evander Kane got 18. So it depends on what you count, I think. And it depends on what point you're at in your draft. I mean, I think when I'm taking that type of a player early, right? If I'm taking a multi-cat monster in the top 5 rounds, I want someone who's also going to contribute in the points department. And quite frankly, when it comes to Brady, I could see his points falling off a cliff just because the team sucks. I don't think that's out of the question, honestly.
I like him this season, actually. I think his points go up because I just think that division is so weak defensively.
I don't know. I mean, he went up. His minutes went up a lot last year. His shooting percentage was down a little bit, but That being said, I mean, I don't know what fixes Ottawa's on-ice shooting percentage. They got worse.
Yeah.
I guess Dadonov's there, which helps, but like, I'd say arguably they got worse, and he still has no good top-line center. So I don't exactly know what he's going to do to get to that, get above 60 points or something. I think he's going to be frustrated in the Canadian division. That's my prediction, and I like him. I don't love his point upside. And someone had asked me before, they were like, "Oh, well, would you take Brady in like the top 3 rounds?" I was like, I don't know, because the truth is, like, when you look at his points, sure, he got 51 point pace last year, but if that doesn't improve, points are the hardest thing to come by. Power play points are the hardest thing to come by in later rounds. Hits and shots, you can kind of make that up, but you can't make up points and power play points. Power play points disappear after a certain round.
Points you can make up. Power play points, maybe not.
Power play points, no.
But I mean, you could just punt power play points. I did it last season to a decent effect.
You did, which was insane. I can't believe you actually succeeded at that. I should have beat you in the finals, but we were robbed of a playoff run. The only other people to talk about here, Chabot, 109.3. I've already talked about him being a sleeper in the Sleepers episode. And then in net, they've got Matt Murray and Anders Nielsen. I like Matt Murray at 174.7 for saves alone. I don't think you're going to get wins. I don't think you're going to get save percentage. But if you're a volume league and you pair him with good goaltenders, or you just punt a goalie stat, like, I like Matt Murray as solely a saves option, essentially.
I feel like he can have better options, but yeah, he's one of the only probable primary starters at that point.
Yeah.
Also, agreed. Dadonov, I mean, he could have an okay season, I'd say.
He could,
but
he could
he's
definitely
not somebody
have
I'm drafting. Season. He had a bad year last season. I'm not overly excited about his arrival in Ottawa.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Stepan. I don't expect anything from him either, or Galchenyuk or anybody.
The only thing I'm curious about with Dadonov is what they do with his minutes, because last year he went down in minutes and played only 17, which limited his potential, I think, in points.
Yeah, but he was playing with Barkov. Who's he playing with now? Colin White?
But here's the thing. When we look at teams, remember when we talked about like players falling off a cliff because they go to teams that don't score, right? One of the biggest things to look at is what's the on-ice shooting percentage for that team. Because if your shots aren't going in around you, you just net have less points to get in on. That's hello, Arizona. Ottawa's on-ice shooting percentage for their top line, let's say Brady Tkachuk, was 8.2% last year. Evgeny Dadonov was on a 56-point pace with 17 power play points and an 11.2 on-ice shooting percentage. So, when you look at what's ahead, I'm looking at more of like a 55 to 65 point pace if it were a full season, which is just not good enough. And he doesn't give you the shot pace to justify drafting him high. Like you said, I'm not touching Dadonov right now. I'm going to wait and see what happens with this Ottawa team. I'll definitely place him on my watch list early and see what he does, but I'm not buying. Not even in a points league. Care less.
Yep.
Oh, and what a way to follow up Ottawa, but with Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot.
Lots to like over here.
Not a lot to talk about, honestly, because a lot of them are very kind of common sense. Matthews, we know what he is. John Tavares, know what he is. Just around point per game.
Tavares is getting a little bit slept on so far.
A little bit.
Going in like the third round.
Yeah.
Point per game pace, probably. Good shots, good power play points.
Yeah.
In a division that, like we've repeated here over and over, is probably going to let in a lot of goals.
Yeah. I love Tavares. And at 33, especially if, say, you go Stamkos and like Marchand in your first 2 rounds. Like, if you're getting John Tavares as a 1C, you're doing great. You're doing fantastic. Mm-hmm. So, like, I like him as a 1C kind of semi-sleeper there. The other guy is Mitch Marner. Makes sense. Look, he's great. And then there's Willie Nylander. A lot of
I do find it interesting that Rantanen is being drafted ahead of Marner.
Yeah, I don't get that one.
I don't get it either. I would have Marner definitely. Just from even if they were the exact same player, which I think Marner's actually a little bit better.
Yeah.
I would have Marner because of the division.
Yeah. So when I look at a guy like Nylander, there's a few things that stand out to me. He's going at 89.9, and I've had some people tell us that he's a sleeper because he's on that good power play and playing with Tavares. Agreed. He is. He's good. There's a few things that scare me about him. One is his shooting percentage at 15.7%. That's a little high for him. Granted, the year before that, he was extremely low. So just for reference, he was on a 71-point pace last year, above point per game. The other thing is he got 17 power play points. But you know where a lot of those came from? A lot of those came from power play goals. And his shooting percentage on the power play was 25% last year. I just don't really see that continuing this year. On top of that, he had a really high IPP, just individual points percentage. So what percentage of the points that are happening on while you're on the ice, you're involved in. 70% is very high. And to me feels a little bit high for Nylander when he's more of like a 60% guy. So I don't see him as a point per game player this upcoming season. And it's also a thing to watch is going to be his shot pace. It came up and that was really good, but he's a points guy. In a points league, he's great. In a categories league, I wouldn't define him as a sleeper. I think he's going right around his value, 89. I think maybe a round earlier is the highest I'd go for him if I was really excited about him.
Yep.
But there's some things that stand out to me that make me think, I don't think he can be point per game. And that's okay. He's still good, but I don't think he's the sleeper that everyone is making him out to be, personally.
Yeah, I that's basically close to what I said here is I think he might find value at his current ADP.
Yes.
But I don't expect him to be a 30-goal scorer this season.
No.
I think that, and if he isn't a 30-goal scorer, he's going to have to find ways to make up the points somewhere else.
Yeah.
So
for what it's worth,
maybe he's a good grab there. Again, division's nice, but don't expect exactly the world. And I think that's kind of the same thing I have here for Morgan Riley. I mean, we saw him have an incredible season 2 seasons ago, and then obviously a weak season last season when he lost top power play to Tyson Barrie, and now he's going to get top power play again.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be expecting a 70-point pace, or I guess this season that would be like 50. No, that would be like 48 points or something.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect that kind of pace from him this season. I do expect him to return to form in a way, but he was like way out there on the breakout year. He only had in the mid 20s of power play points, so he had a huge chunk coming in at even strength. He just had a great shooting percentage. Yeah, he just had an excellent year. That's just basically what happened.
He had 20 goals.
I think the real answer is somewhere in between. Maybe a 55 to 60 point pace in regular seasons. That'll put him in like the 45 point range or so. Yeah, a little bit less than that, 40, 42.
I do think he has that potential for a monstrous season. I could see him be a top 5 defenseman this year on that Leafs team now that he has top power play again. But like you said, there's a lot.
His ADP just seems good to me.
Yeah. With Nylander, I mean, they're very similar. Nylander this last year scored 31 goals. His expected goals for was 21. So he scored 10 more than what was expected of him. Great. I mean, awesome that he outperformed it. He hadn't outperformed before. And the same thing happened here with Morgan Riley, which the year prior he had scored 20 goals. He was expected to score 10. So outperformed by 10. This last year he scored 3, was expected to score 5. So this last year, from a shooting perspective, Riley was right on par. Where he got hurt a little bit was his IPP. He wasn't as involved in assists as he normally was. He also had a very high secondary assist rate. Not very high. He had a pretty high just secondary assist rate in that year prior. So what's going to happen with Riley? I don't know. I think 57.9 feels a little rich. I'd actually rather pay the price for Dougie, John Carlson, or Roman Josi earlier than wait to get Morgan Riley, if those were my options, personally.
Yeah. I think he's better in points leagues as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're gambling a little bit because you're hoping that he gets back to this form from,
Sure, but I don't think there's a lot of other upside options like him after his ADP.
Yeah. And Jake Muzzin getting drafted at 157.3, I don't see value in him at all.
Yeah, not really.
This season. I would just stay away, pretty much, it would be my take on Jake Muzzin.
There's one more forward I have here in Zach Hyman, who I feel like, man, we talk about him so much for him not being a very relevant player.
Yeah.
I think that just has to go with how many Toronto fans there are out there. But he's a guy that has a very low ceiling and a pretty high floor. He's sort of exactly what you're going to get every single season, which is like a mid-50s point pace with a knack for goals sometimes and like okay hits.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure why he always winds up being the hot thing for a couple weeks, but I'm not anywhere near him. I wouldn't take a late round flyer because, like I said, his ceiling is low. The guys that you take late round flyers on are the ones that potentially have a high ceiling that might break out. Hyman is not going to break out. He's not intended. That's not his role.
No.
Toronto doesn't even want him to be a point. I mean, of course they would take it, but he's not expected or designed or deployed in a way to be a high point player. So don't expect it from him.
Yeah, what's interesting about him too is that last year he shot at 20%. But when you look at his expected goals, he was actually expected to score 18 and he scored 21. Which is pretty interesting to me that he actually kind of got into good scoring
net
positions.
Front type stuff. So high danger chances and stuff.
Exactly. So I think there's a chance, but I think last year what we saw from him was the best of him, unless he got top power play. What you saw last year from Zach Hyman was the best you're going to get from him, I think, aside from if he were to all of a sudden book top power play or get it. I mean, he played almost 19. He played 19 minutes last year game. That's pretty dang good for Zach Hyman. And still, he was at that 60-point pace. So, like Brandon said, I just don't see him doing that much better. And then there's Frederik Andersen, 59.8. He's a weird one.
It's like, okay. Probably going to get a good amount of starts, probably.
But
it's a tough division, and their defense still isn't super. So
I just don't know if he's going to get your wins, right? He's going to get you saves. I don't think he's going to get you the save percentage and goals against average. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's enough. For what it's worth, I like him a lot. I like him around that ADP. I don't love it. But again, remember that I like him probably more than Binnington. I think. I don't know. He's a tough nut to crack.
I drafted him on mock, and I think I hated it.
I don't hate Frederik Andersen there. I just think again, what are you're sacrificing, I think, save percentage and goals against average for saves and wins. So what does that do for you in your league is the big question mark, I guess.
Right.
Now for Vancouver. Two more. First one, obviously, Elias Pettersson, 17.3. In my opinion, overdrafted. Way too high for what he is. I get that he is a superstar. The problem for me is that he doesn't really give you anything other than kind of points when it comes to...
he hasn't even hit a point per game pace yet.
Yeah.
Like, why is he going so high? He's going over proven point per game players.
Yeah. He was on an 80-point pace last year, 76-point pace the year prior to that. I mean, I just don't really understand why. His shot pace is fine. He obviously doesn't hit and block and doesn't get PIMs. So, I mean, what's the difference between him and this might draw ire from some people.
After him, right?
I mean, honestly, Elias Pettersson is the forward version of Cale Makar.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, is that wrong? He gets shots, gets points, obviously gets more points, but when you compare,
it's very similar to Mark Stone as well.
Yeah, it's just Makar's going above Hedman, along with the Yosis and Hamiltons, but does nothing else aside from points. Pettersson's kind of the same way. He's going up here with these Marners and Matthews and whatever, these high-end guys, Stamkos, Marchand, all these people, but he has nothing else to speak for it except for his points. So in the points league, fantastic. Yes, he's great. But for anything other than in Yahoo Standard, I don't know. And his floor, I don't know. I don't see the value at 17.3, especially being a center. When there's so many good centers later. I just don't. I just personally don't see Elias Pettersson being worth that. I mean, let me give you an example. Okay, really quick here from last year. This is a center right wing that played 66 games, was on a 76-point pace, shot 170, or was on a 175 shot on goal pace, matched Elias Pettersson's power play point total. Okay, same power play point total, literally matched his hit pace, and was just around his block pace. You know who it is?
Elias Lindholm?
No, Travis Konechny. Travis Konechny is virtually Elias Pettersson.
You are going to
So
get
is
some
Elias
hate mail
Lindholm.
for that one.
Oh, yeah. But that's the truth. I don't know what to tell you. Last season, Travis Konechny
maybe.
was Elias Pettersson. And yet, where are they?
These thoughts are Gambies and Gambies alone. I
These
will
are
say
free.
nothing on the subject.
These are free. Can you believe this podcast is free? But seriously, I mean, when you look at the stats, Travis Konechny was Elias Pettersson. My point here is, this is my point. My point is not to say Travis Konechny is better than Elias Pettersson, because I know people are going to be pissed about that. My point is, you can get Elias Pettersson's point value later. You can get the value of what Pettersson offers later on. You cannot
I'm
get
not sure
a
I would say
Marchand value.
you can get it out of Konechny. I don't
No.
think so.
Maybe not connecting. My point is just that there are players out there that are semi-similar to Elias Pettersson.
There
When you look
are,
at-
but I feel like Mark Stone is
But for the-
a more
but for the
apt
value.
example who is
for
still
the value,
going later.
you're trading a 17th overall pick for people who are going so much later. You have Elias Lindholm, who was on a 63-point pace, got 19 power play points, very similar shot on goal numbers. He's also going later. There are relatively
I would just take JT
comparable
Miller,
players.
honestly, a few rounds
Yeah.
later.
I just don't see it at 17th overall. To me, you can make up what Pettersson has later. I'm not saying these players are better than Pettersson. I'm saying they offer the same things from just a coverage standpoint.
Yeah.
Bring on the
So-
hate mail.
Right. With JT Miller, his ADP is 47.8 or so. I think that he's in a good spot at that ADP. Puts him right around the fourth round, or the end of the third or so. And I think that makes sense. He's, especially in a Cats, well, I don't know. Just in general, I think. I don't think he outpoints Pettersson again. I think that he's probably going to be just below point per game this season, or maybe at. The problem, and this is an interesting thing about Vancouver, not a single player on that team got more than 2.5 shots a game. 0.
That's wild.
It's weird. Well, it's actually Besser may have, but he didn't play a full season. The highest shot total on the team was 178 from Brock Besser. Not Brock Besser, from Bo Horvat. It's weird. It's just a weird team. JT Miller, like everybody else on that team, doesn't shoot much. Very hard to get shots out of the team, except for, I guess, Besser. And so what you're going to get out of him is a good point totals, weak shot totals, and decent hit totals. So, yeah, I think as far as the, like, I guess, elite, really, of all the forwards, the only one I'm really considering, given the ADP and where I think people are going to be taking, is JT Miller. I think Besser, we already called him a bust. I think that's should be
Especially
unsurprising at this point. You're really gambling a little bit too much that early. Pettersson, we just mentioned why we don't think he's worth that much. Miller's probably right around right. And then Bo Horvat is like fine in face-off leagues.
I think Miller might be a little bit of a sleeper, actually. Like I think
he's about right. I wouldn't go too much further because I do think that he does have a floor and it's a little worrisome.
So I think he's going around the right place. I think he could end up being better than
definitely
49.
wind up beating that. I just wouldn't stretch
Bank
for
on
him.
it.
I wouldn't
Right.
grab him in like the second or anything crazy.
I mean, how is Elias Pettersson going above Tavares, for example?
People like him. I don't know.
It's just weird. I don't get it. I don't understand it. It really makes no sense to me. Anyways, continue moving on. So we talked about Besser. We talked about JT Miller. Love JT Miller, especially. Even in a points league, honestly, I love JT Miller.
He's great in
he
points
holds
league.
so much value. I will say he outperformed his expected goals by a lot last season with a really good shooting percentage of 16. So I think it's worth kind of, pointing that out. But still, I still like him a lot. Bo Horvat, I like him quite a bit. He offers some upside, a little bit, not a lot. There's not a lot of upside there with Bo Horvat. 60. He's like a 60-point guy, regular season.
Yeah, he's like a
60
better
point.
Zach Hyman to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like, except for in face-off leagues, he's pretty good because he does very well with face-offs. But in typical standard leagues, points or cats, he just doesn't quite do enough, and his ceiling's too low to really. Like he'll do stuff. and he's not super risky because he has a high floor.
Yeah. The
He's
thing
he's
is,
a high floor, low ceiling guy, just like Hyman.
he's also a guy that like we've known who he's been for years. He's not like this. He's not some guy out to deceive us. We know exactly who he is. Like, he's around a 60-ish point guy. That's who he's been. I think he can maybe be a little bit better. His secondary assist rate, for example, was really low this last year. There's a little bit of room to improve. Otherwise, his on-ice shooting percentage, power play percentage, everything has been like the same for a while now. Shooting his own shooting percentage. He's just a predictable guy, which is kind of great, honestly, especially that late. I like Bo Horvat. I think he, like you said, he has a predictable floor, a very low ceiling. But that's okay sometimes, especially so late when you're getting a center, that late, 141.
I feel like I want to gamble late. He might be somebody I take off the waiver if I decide like my team's just good and I'd rather just keep my floor high.
That's fair. I guess it depends on how deep your league is too.
Yeah.
Whatnot. And then after that, we've got Quinn Hughes going 42.4, moving on to defenseman. Fine. He is like Cale Makar, honestly. Like,
yeah. I actually like him more than Makar.
I do. I like him more than
rated
Makar,
the
too.
same, but
although
I don't like the idea. In a points league, he's good. I'll give him that. Even at that ADP. In a Cats league, he gives you nothing but points. His shots are low. His everything's low. I think he's straight up dangerous to take in a Cats league.
I will counter. I do not like him more than Makar. I like Makar way more.
I like
Even
him
in a
more
points
than Makar
league.
because of the division.
Sure. But I think I like Makar more still. He offers more, but I think they are essentially the same trap early.
I was saying in a points league.
In a points league, I still like Makar more, personally.
We'll see.
I like Makar more. But in a Cats league, I think they're the same trap, both of them. I think Quinn Hughes at 42 is still too high. And you've got guys like Morgan Riley going after him and others. I mean, at least from a just coverage standpoint, nah, no thanks. Nope. It's not worth it. I know he got 25 power play points last year, played 68 games, but still not a fan of that ADP. Then there's Alex Edler, honestly not draftable this year, unless a lot changes.
He is a discount Darnell Nurse. So in block leagues, I still like him. He gets not great shots, but pretty decent hits, pretty decent PIMs, pretty decent blocks.
Yeah. His blocks are really...
And he gets some even strength points.
Yeah, what I don't like is that his minutes dropped last season, and he's a peripheral guy, and peripherals require minutes. Yeah. You got to be a minute cruncher to get those. And so, we saw his hits and blocks and shots all drop kind of exactly in line with his average time on ice. So I would expect kind of the same.
I would
this
still,
year with him.
Depending on what my team comp needs, I would consider taking him in the end.
Yeah.
Just as I don't really know what I need yet, so I'm just going to cover all my bases and, maybe you move him off later or whatever.
Yeah.
Although, you could do the same thing by taking like a Chernak type, depending on what you need.
Now to the goaltenders. Brain Holtby, Thatcher Demko.
I am not drafting either one.
I don't like either.
Like if I took either one, I would take a stab at Demko way late.
Yes.
And just hope he takes the starting role and hope that it's not a bloodbath.
Yeah. I don't like either one because neither one has a starting role. I think they split.
Yeah, I do too.
I think they fully split. And so,
I think they
therefore,
split, and I wouldn't be surprised if both of them just get lit repeatedly.
Agreed.
So,
yeah. And I think if there's...
we'll see.
I think I agree with you. The one to take a gamble on, if you were to take a gamble on a goaltender, is on Demko at 148.2 ADP. If he doesn't start, fine, you drop him. You've lost nothing. Whereas with Holtby, that's a 99. You can still get a pretty good player around that range. You're still doing well. So I wouldn't want to take that gamble. Okay, the last one here, the Winnipeg Jets. Last one, the Canadian division. Let's start with literally what makes the Winnipeg Jets hum, and that's Connor Hellebuyck. 18.7.
There's a lot that make them hum because just you saying that made me think of a lot of different players. That's interesting. But
well, no, I'm not saying that they don't have interesting players. I just mean that the backbone of the team is Connor Hellebuyck. Yeah. Without Connor Hellebuyck, this is a non-playoff team. Full stop.
I think that points more at their defense than anything, but yeah.
But I think just as a team, though, Winnipeg is not the team they are if Connor Hellebuyck doesn't show up.
Yep.
Without Connor Hellebuyck, they don't do anything. Anyways, I trust him a lot. I think he's proven at this point. I like him just as much as I like Vasilevsky almost. Just in the sense of wins and saves. I don't like him. I don't know. It's scary because of that division. He's the goalie to pick from that division. Is it worth using a second round pick on him?
It has to be a saves league, in my opinion.
Yeah, it has to be a saves league first and foremost. But then at that time, you don't have wins guaranteed. The Winnipeg Jets struggled a lot last year.
They could I wouldn't be surprised if they don't make the playoffs.
So Dom has them at a. I'll tell you right now what their percentage of making the playoffs is. One second. Pulling it up. They have a 47% chance of making the playoffs, according to Dom.
That sounds about right. I would have given him. I would have put on the other side of 50%, but sure.
Just really not great. So to me, it really comes down to, can Connor Hellebuck have a monster season to save them? Do I want to gamble on that in my second round? Not really, with the goaltenders that are left late so far that we've seen in mocks. I like the value I'm getting for forwards early so much more than I like my goaltender value compared to later.
Yep.
I love Hellebuck. I think he's incredible. I think he's going to have a great season. I don't know if I want to gamble on that early. But if you were,
it feels a lot like last season to me, where Vasilevsky is pretty much the only goalie I want early.
Yeah.
In standard leagues with win save percentage, goals against average, and shutouts or whatever.
I will say, I'm in a league that counts goalies pretty heavily, and I'll probably try to take Hellebuck early. Depending on where I'm at in my position of draft, like say I was in 6th position, I'd probably take a skater, and then on the turn
that's
try
a
to
weird
take
league,
Hellebuck.
to be fair.
It is a goalie heavy league, but I think some people are in those. I think some people are in goalie heavy leagues, and in those, I like Connor Hellebuck a lot.
You weirdos.
I know we are weirdos, but I like it. It's fun.
I would rather be in a no goalie league than a goalie heavy league.
I like it. I like it because it changes the strategy. What I do like is that you do get penalized a lot too for shitty goalies. So that's good. When a goalie has a terrible game, you do get penalized quite a bit. Okay, so let's move on to the skaters here. Top center, Mark Scheifele at 33.7. I think that's value. I think Scheifele is kind of going around where I expected him. I think it feels about right. Scheifele is a beast. He was on a 84-point pace the year prior. He was on a 84-point pace the year before that. He's a pretty predictable guy.
Given up assuming that he's going to be human with his shooting percentage.
Yeah.
I guess he's just not.
I mean, what's crazy is last year he scored 29 goals. His expected goals was 24, and he has 17% shooting percentage. This is just who he is. And I think he just gets into good scoring positions. He's a really good player, and he gives you... The thing is, with Mark Scheifele, and this is why I like him at his ADP of 33, is he's a points first guy with fewer shots. Honestly, he reminds me a lot of Elias Pettersson.
Yep.
And guess where Pettersson's going?
Cheaper.
Mm-hmm. See my point here that I was making earlier? Right? The thing where Pettersson is good,
most likely,
but just not worth a 17th overall. Yeah. Mark Scheifele's your answer. Also, just it being a center, I just don't want to center that early. Anyways, enough about Pettersson. I hope people see the light of what I'm saying there. But anyways, I don't know. I think I'm still going to get flamed for comparing him to Konechny.
Oh yeah, the Konechny comparison. You're going to have definite torches at your door.
My building's going to be burned down tomorrow. I know it. Anyways, so Scheifele, really good. We know what he is. Then there's Blake Wheeler, falling to 44.3 this year when I feel like every year he falls. I don't get it. To be fair, his point pace did fall off a lot last year. He's on a 75-point pace last year, 91 the year before that.
Yeah.
His shots went down
2 years
too.
at 91, so...
Yeah.
There was a reason for him to drop off this season, but I think he's pretty good value at that ADP, especially in PIM leagues.
I agree. And I mean, his shot pace is still good. I definitely like him around, the tail end of a second or third. At least we're in a PIMS league, so he does increase a little bit there. But if you don't count PIMS, I honestly think 44 is around right.
I like
maybe
him
a little
third. I don't know if I would take him in the second anymore.
Yeah,
I think
the third is right.
Fall off, it could be a little risky.
Yeah, I think third is right. Fourth to me feels a little late. I think third feels like the right, like maybe middle to late third feels like the right place for someone like Blake Wheeler at this point in a categories league. In a points league, I don't know. He actually scares me a little bit in a points league if his minutes continue to drop. That
Yeah.
75-point pace from last year
No, I
scares
mean,
me, and
I
he
don't
did
know
that.
his minutes are really going to drop, but
Well,
we'll see.
the thing that scares me is he did a 75-point pace with a 12% shooting. So, can he get that much better? I don't
It's
know.
all his power play points.
Yeah,
There's no
that
power
too.
play points there for some reason.
True. He went from 33 power play points the year before that to only 22. Only. To only 22
right.
this last season. And then there's Kyle Connor, who you've already mentioned you like a lot.
Yeah, I put he's at 71.7. He feels like a steal, but for some reason, my brain keeps telling me if I take him, I'm going to like lose for some reason.
He's a
But,
points
like,
guy. But
yeah, but he also shoots a lot.
yeah,
like he's
hard.
good.
That's hard to find later. 17 power play points too. That's hard to find that late. I feel like at around the 75 mark. That's
He's
tough.
basically what Ehlers will be if Ehlers winds up on power play 1 at some point.
Yeah, he's what everyone wants Ehlers to be.
Yep.
But he's
so
just
I
not.
you know, it's hard to argue with taking him in the 6th round somewhere.
Yeah, I like
That feels
him a lot.
good.
He's someone I'm definitely going to be targeting and kind of marking on my draft sheet to make sure to pay attention to for where he's going. Then there's Patrick Laine, around 34. Honestly, feels really right.
Yep.
I'm a fan of Laine this season. He really
They
stepped
do
it up
like
last
as
year.
a team. Everybody seems roughly where they should be. Surprisingly,
Surprisingly,
except for
it's-
Ehlers, who's like weirdly
Makes no
off the
sense.
map.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand him. But as far as Laine goes,
I think this coming season could really be the season that people want out of Laine.
yeah,
You know, they saw the first season, everybody went completely berserk, drafted him in the first round, all that kind of good stuff, expecting to see him break past the point per game, which he has not done.
yeah.
Point per game mark. I think this season is his best opportunity to do that, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him do it.
There is one thing I'd like to see more out of Laine, and that is to shoot more on the power play. When you look at 2 seasons ago, sure, he had that terrible point pace, but he shot 95 times on the power play. This last season, he only shot 57 times on the power play. Granted, much less games, but still, just I want to see more shots on the power play from him because that's his bread and butter. He was on a 76-point pace this last season, almost point per game. So, like you said, I think this is the year we could see Patrick Laine be who we want him to be, right? And I think at 34, it makes a lot of sense. I kind of like him, not more than Scheifele, but around the same, especially with that wing designation versus the center designation. So, fan of that.
Makes sense.
Then there's Ehlers, who we've already talked about, is a
Well, actually, there's something I want to add to both Laine and Ehlers.
okay. Both of them.
And that is Stasny's coming in.
Yes.
Stasny has a history here, and wait, yeah, am I
Yeah.
blacking out? He played there, right? Why am I keep thinking he played for the Blues?
He did. He played for the Vegas, but he
played
did
for
play for the
Vegas, yeah,
Blues at
but-
some point.
I want to make sure I'm not saying something totally crazy right now, but because I'm almost positive he played on this line previously.
He did.
Why am I? He
They
did.
traded.
Yes.
They traded for him, and then he left.
Yes.
in free agency.
He did. Okay, so he did play on the Blues and on Winnipeg, and okay,
Yes.
I'm just.
And on you are
I
losing
went to
it, so-
look at the Jets lines, and I saw
That's
the
it.
blue, and I was like, he
Look,
played for the
look,
Blues,
the
though.
cat is
and
out
I'm
of
like,
the
he also
bag
played for the
before
Jets
this-
anyway.
Before this
he's
episode,
done
Brandon
this.
just like shoved a box of mac and cheese into his mouth. So I think he's finally starting
notice him
to
now.
feel the repercussions of that now, mentally and physically.
But Laine is a huge upgrade for them at center.
Laine is a huge upgrade for them at center.
Stasny is a huge upgrade for Laine at center. Stasny being able to center a line that's needed a center for a long time is going to do wonders for both Ehlers and Laine. I don't know how much we're really going to see that. I'm hoping that translates into an increase in even strength points. It should. I don't know how much of a difference it'll really make in the end, but it is nice to see that there's definite upside for them at even strength. Unfortunately, Stasny himself doesn't have any upside really because, okay, he might do something at even strength. He's not going to get on that loaded top power play. It just won't happen.
Yep.
And power play 2, he does make better. Now there's Ehlers and Stasny on there, but it's not in the Jets' best interest to give that line significant time on the ice, and I don't think they will. So he's limited there.
Yeah. I like Ehlers. I think he's kind of a sleeper, but like you said, he's limited. But I mean,
I definitely think he's a sleeper.
For what
I
he
think
does
that
that late, like
he shoots so much. He's a decent points guy. He's obviously a black hole for power play points.
Yeah.
But he's, like we've said a few times now, he's like one injury, one anything away from being on that dynamic first power play.
Yeah. Moving on to defense, there's really only two people to talk about here, Neil Pionk and Josh Morrissey. Neil Pionk is the guy to get. And to me, he's a huge sleeper.
Mm-hmm.
Huge sleeper. I mean, even at 95.6. To me, if I had to bet on one guy to end up as top 5 defenseman at the end of the year, but is not currently being drafted as one, it'd be Neil Pionk.
Yeah, he's definitely up there.
He'd be my bet. Maybe Morgan Riley, if we're going by those categories. I think Morgan Riley is not in the top 5, technically. But that'd be cheating. I mean, come on, that's not fun. Neil Pionk to me is the defenseman that I could see being top 5 defenseman end of season if all goes right. And I think things could go right for him. He had 25
There's
power
a few
play
I
points,
can see in that designation, but
52-point pace, 204 shot pace. I mean, he was doing really, really good.
yep.
And he gets you some good hits. I love me some Neil Pionk. I mean, you all know. I remember the guy who I remember there was a person who knew how much I loved Neil Pionk way back in the day, and they named their horse. And what was the game? Red Dead Redemption.
I think it was Red Dead.
2?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Red Dead. And they named their horse Neil Pionk for me and sent me a video of the horse. It was very sweet. I was touched. I actually loved it. But Neil Pionk, I love him. He has a horse named after him in Red Dead because of me. I think he's incredible. And he could end up being your D. My dream for my drafts is to start off with a Yossi, a Hedman, a Carlson, or a Dougie, and then reach a little bit for like a Neil Pionk, and then maybe get Shabbat too. Like in those rounds there, you could hypothetically go like Dahlin, Pionk, and Shabbat, and just have like this ridiculous top power play defense.
McAvoy. Yeah.
Or
There's a lot
McAvoy.
of good defensemen in there.
A lot of good ones right there. So that's kind of my goal. Is I think I'm gonna really, really just wait on goaltenders, but prioritize one good defense, then target him. So I like Pionk a lot. Look, Morrissey's a good one too to put on your watch list. He wasn't terrible last year. At times he was serviceable. I had him on my team for a lot of the season. Brandon always said why. He didn't really get it. To be honest,
I'm
I
not
don't
touching
either.
him unless Pionk gets
I'm not
hurt.
touching him in a draft. In a draft, I'm not touching
I'm
him.
not touching him, period. His peripherals suck.
His peripherals do suck. He has no shots, no blocks, no hits. He is butt. But, you know, he's a player. And there you go. Those were a bunch of players. And
He's a
that's
warm body.
That was our division preview. I mean, if you made it this far, congrats. Thank you. Let us know what you think. Hopefully my Pedersen take didn't piss you off too much.
They already left.
They already left, probably. They were like, you know what? This podcast is shite. They are terrible. We're never listening to them again. We'll be back next time. We're not going to let you know which division we're doing next. That'll be a surprise. But you should expect them to be coming out pretty much once a day up until the weekend. So there's a lot of episodes that are going to be coming out here. We're working hard to get you this stuff before your draft day. Definitely join our Discord as well and our Twitter. Otherwise, thank you for listening. We will catch you next time.
Yep. Thanks for listening.